Chapter 46, Daniel. Daniel stood over the sequencer array, adjusting the calibration threads for the third time. The lattice responded sluggishly, old hardware. Worn runes, but still precise enough to give him what he needed. A clean signal. Just once. He made a final adjustment, triggered a soft mana pulse, and watched as the glyphs aligned in near-perfect sync. No bleed, no chaotic spikes, just clean structure. A certain foundation. The array hummed quietly. Stable. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. The test gave him a better sense of Ethan's original intent and, in the process, helped clarify his own. Every iteration taught him something new. Every failed sync brought him closer to what this system could be. It was amazing how much this stuff was like circuit boards, but at the same time not. It was close to the concepts they were exploring, like a dream of something familiar with the ridiculous and unexpected thrown in. He wondered if this was how Bill Gates felt all those years ago in his garage. Yeah, it was a good idea to come here, he said softly. Even if the administration is a bunch of clowns. Agreed. No one here is going to help us. They're outdated. It's like they want to sharpen a sword with a spoon while pretending it's innovative. Daniel snorted. That's one way to put it. Ethan didn't reply right away. Daniel traced one of the calibration threads absently. You built all this without help. No team, no funding. Half the time, you didn't even have permission. A pause. You took raw instinct and tried to turn it into architecture. That's not just impressive, it's borderline insane. And I mean that in the best possible way. Ethan exhaled quietly, which was interesting, considering he didn't have lungs. Well, I had time. Sure, when you're an outcast, that happens, Daniel said. But more than that, you had vision. My world was built because of people like that. And you should know, those people are the ones who change everything. Another silence, not awkward, thoughtful. You saw the problem years before anyone else even realized there was one. You tried to fix it with tools no one understood. And now, you've given me a foundation that might actually get us where we need to go. You're doing more with it than I ever could? Daniel shook his head. I would have been lost without you here. Not just because of the memory bleed, but your insight, your proximity to the issues. I like to think I've adapted well, but there's no way I'd have come this far without your input. He paused. I think the hardest part is asking the right question. And on that front, mission accomplished. A beat. Then Ethan quieter. I never thought anyone would see it. Let alone this. Daniel smiled as he gathered up the notes. You weren't wrong, Ethan. Just early. The heavy footsteps came before the voice. Familiar weight. Familiar rhythm. Nathan Lee strolled into the vault, hands tucked into his belt sash, wearing the expression of a man who'd spent the morning doing absolutely nothing useful, and was deeply proud of it. Packing up already? Nathan asked. Hope the nerds didn't drain the fire out of you. Daniel looked up. Done here. Nathan gave the sequencer a once-over. You ever going to explain what this thing does? Daniel closed the housing panel, not without diagrams. And a translator, Nathan grinned. Right. In that case, good news. Life-changing. Possibly painful. Daniel arched a brow. Nathan clapped a hand on his shoulder with all the subtlety of a warhammer. You, my brilliant, brooding, not-so-secret genius of a brother-in-law, have just been officially assigned a sword instructor. Daniel blinked. You? Nathan gave an exaggerated bow. Me. And Master Shen. Father gave the word. You're coming back to the estate. Training starts tonight. Lee sword method. Full instruction. No half steps. Daniel considered. Didn't your last student get carted off to the medical sect? Nathan's grin widened. That was an accident. He blinked during a parry drill. Oh, well, in that case. Nathan leaned against the central column. We leave by second bell. I drag you in. You sweat before dinner. You'll thank me eventually. Daniel began securing the sequencer into its travel case. That's not all, is it? Nathan looked pleased. Smart and paranoid. I like it. He held up 2 fingers. A tempering master. Inner hall. She'll read your body type, core purity, breath rhythm, the whole thing. Help you lock in a proper tempering mantra. Daniel nodded. That would help. A poorly matched cultivation method was one of the most common causes of meridian degradation across all stages of practice. Having someone analyze his body mechanics, breath structure, and internal rhythm could shave years off his training curve. And Nathan flipped up a 3rd finger. Technique master. Basics, forms, footwork, rhythm, arrays, and activation sequences. The stuff most sects bury in poetic metaphors. We're skipping the pretty words. Just real drills. Daniel paused. You're giving me a team, Nathan beamed. Now, Machine, I'm building you into the kind of badass who deserves one. Daniel let the silence stretch. Then, fine, Nathan blinked. That's it? No protest, no sarcasm, no muttering about meathead mysticism? Daniel shrugged. I've seen the logic. Now I need the rhythm. You're about to get beaten into enlightenment. It'll be good for you. Daniel closed the case. I am all for this, so long as I'm still walking after the first week. No promises, Nathan said, already striding toward the door. Pack fast. 2 bells. I want to see you wobble into the courtyard. Daniel watched him go, the grin still trailing behind like a war banner. Then he looked back down at the sequencer, the still glowing grid of runes and light locked in silent calibration. Swordsmanship and system design, he murmured. Let's see if they can coexist.
Chapter 47. Princess Sophie Virelin. From the high terrace above the Western Archive, Sophie Virelin, currently known as Marenne, watched the world unfold beneath her with a scholar's poise and a predator's patience. She wore her illusionary disguise, though she didn't need it here. Her robes were subdued, unadorned ivory with a charcoal sash, plain enough to pass for student-issued, but tailored enough to make the assumption difficult. Her fake hair looked like it had been cut to her shoulders and tucked behind one ear in a way no princess would have allowed. Not in court. Not in House Virelin. Which was the point. She wasn't a princess here. Officially, she wasn't here at all. She sipped cooling tea brewed from jasmine petals and bone leaf. It helped steady her mana signature, keeping it flat, quiet, non-threatening. Just another curious young academic. It was almost fun, but not as fun as watching him. Down in the courtyard below, Ethan Joe walked beside his brother-in-law, Nathan Lee, speaking quietly as they packed up their cases. Behind them, the vault's exit shimmered with residual, warding subtle power that didn't announce itself, but couldn't be ignored. Ethan didn't laugh like Nathan. He didn't strut or posture. The man spoke and acted like he had contempt for the world, but then tackled problems with the focus of a monk. This was her first time seeing him in person. Though she did know him, there had been reports when he was still at university. He'd received grants and had finished something like a 12-year school course in less than 5 years. Top of his class in practically every subject. He had saved the matriarch of the Lee family from a blood disease that the medical sect had given up on. He had done so without pomp or ceremony. That was what caught her attention. Not the power, not the bloodline, and certainly not the reputation. It was the utter unnerving focus on the practical. Meeting him didn't disappoint. He moved through a room like every variable was part of an unfinished equation still running in his head. The palace reports had called Ethan Joe a prodigy, a genius. And like most prodigies, he was erratic, strange, and more than a little unnerving. Some in Imperial intelligence thought he was radical dangerous, even in that singular, brilliant academic way. But even with all that preamble, he hadn't been on their radar. He dropped off the map until 2 months ago when he married Vivian Lee and saved her lover by kneeling, full kowtow, in front of her father and the entire bloody empire. The act brought him attention. A lot of it. It made her go back and research him. His projects. His academic record. His habits. What he wanted to accomplish. His likes, his dislikes, his romantic entanglements, everything. She found a truly interesting man. What the intelligence reports hadn't said was that Ethan Joe was trying to build a new world underneath the old one. That he wanted to rewrite their foundation of magic, cultivation, and inheritance. He'd written theories in 3 incredibly difficult fields that even his professors didn't fully understand, let alone grasp what he was trying to accomplish. Now that was a man. Sophie tilted her head, eyes narrowing. She hadn't come here for him. This trip, this personal sabbatical, had been about surveillance, academic monitoring, an excuse to walk the halls of the Empire's greatest research stronghold without dragging House Virelin's expectations behind her. But Ethan Joe had changed that. He wasn't supposed to be here. Not really. The lost Zhou son turned political sacrifice, married off to the Lee family like a pretty tool. That was the story. That was the script. But what she saw yesterday in the debate chamber? That wasn't a man reciting theories. That was a man redirecting gravity. He stood in a room full of legacy bloodlines, dismissed everything they thought sacred, and replaced it with something more. Clarity. And an even more dangerous plan. He doesn't belong with the Lee family, Sophie thought. She didn't mean that cruelly. The Lists were loyal, strong, formidable. Vivian Lee was the definition of an imperial warrior elite. Elegant, terrifying, ice wrapped in silk. But that was the problem. The Lists were swords. Ethan Joe wasn't. Ethan Joe was the one building the forge. Sophie rested her chin lightly on one hand. She liked smart men. She liked engineers, scholars, and machine mechanics, the architects of systems. Men who didn't just move the world. They rewrote its rules and pretended not to notice. Ethan Joe was one of those men. This man was trying to shake the foundation of their world. And in a word, it was sexy as hell. And he was bloody handsome to boot. Her brother would hate him. That thought came and went, fleeting, but it made her grin. Prince Alaric Virulin didn't like things he couldn't punch or seduce or bend with titles. He liked warriors, showmen, people who would bleed for applause. He wouldn't see the threat or potential that Ethan Joe represented, but Sophie did. And maybe that was why she couldn't look away. She adjusted the cup in her hands, letting the tea's warmth settle over her fingers as Ethan and Nathan mounted a waiting carriage and began to roll down the central avenue, heading back toward the Lee estate. He didn't look up, didn't glance back, didn't notice her at all. Perfect. She smiled as she considered the first rule of politics, which was surprisingly simple. You couldn't control what you couldn't see coming. And Ethan Joe didn't see her at all. Yet, the carriage disappeared from view a minute later, swallowed by the shifting mist of the southern ward lines. Sophie sat still. She let the glamour hiding her true appearance fade. Her tea had gone cold. She didn't notice. She looked down at the contact on her message crystal where Ethan Joe's name sat. Superimposed. It had taken a call to her assistant, Elizabeth, to get his number. It was that easy for her. Now the question was, should she reach out? Talk to him? How would she even do that? Could she do it as Marin? That wasn't weird. Was it? She considered her options as she thought about the way he'd spoken in the debate hall, measured but unshaken, his voice threading through the noise and dragging every ear toward him like gravity made audible. His voice was nice measured, low, with a cadence that seemed to steady the air around it, controlled without being cold, intense but never theatrical. It had the kind of resonance that made people stop what they were doing and listen, even if they didn't understand why. And Sophie liked the way it sounded. She liked it a lot. She would have liked it even more if she'd understood what he was saying. But the truth was, she'd caught maybe 20% of it. Not because she wasn't smart, she was, but because he wasn't speaking for an audience. He was speaking in structure, in scaffolding, in the bones of a system she didn't yet recognize. It wasn't just a theory. It was a reframing, a realignment of perspective, a pivot in how the entire room, even reality, maybe, was supposed to function. She hadn't felt it in her chest, like charm or conviction. She'd felt it in her mind. A shift, a pattern trying to reveal itself, a pressure behind her thoughts urging her to pay attention. And for Sophie Virulin, who had grown up trained to defend her heart, it was the mind, the pull of an idea too big to look away from, that was always the greater threat. She stood slowly, moving through the high terrace and back toward her hidden chamber within the Academy's upper faculty housing. Her guards didn't know she was here, excluding her personal bodyguard who wouldn't let her out of his sight. Her brother didn't know anything, nor her mother. Only her eldest cousin, Princess Kayla, knew the full extent of Sophie's unofficial excursions. She reached her room, shut the door, and unpinned her hair. Then she sat by the window and stared out over the grounds, thinking not of names or politics or succession, but of need and the future. The Empire's future. Ethan's future, should he accomplish even half of what he was trying to push. The Lee family was powerful. That was undeniable. But they were also simple, not stupid. Never that. Vivian was sharp, lethal even. But she was predictable in the way all weapon-born nobles were. She lived in service to control, their legacy, and her reputation. Her instincts were brilliant, but always pointed in one direction. Forward. Push harder. Swing cleaner. Move faster. It made them great cultivators and specialists, powerful friends and allies. It did not breed innovation or stimulate the mind. The Lee house couldn't cultivate Ethan Joe. Not the way they needed to. Sophie considered Vivian Lee, the Ice Lotus, the crane of the House of Lee, one of the four great beauties, and for good reason. Graceful, fierce, and unbelievably beautiful. Vivian seemed born with the kind of cultivated presence that made entire rooms stand still when she entered. Among the four, she was the most mysterious, the most coveted, the most untouchable. But more important than that, Sophie respected her. Respected her work ethic, her desire for perfection, her focus on leading her house. Yes, Sophie respected her, but she didn't envy her. And she certainly didn't want her to win. Ethan Joe had already started drifting out from under the Lee shadow in a quiet, calm, reasonable manner that disregarded both resistance and permission. Before yesterday, Ethan Joe was being whispered about because of his humility, his restraint, his perseverance. Now it was going to be because of his genius. And based on her investigation, Vivian hadn't noticed how desirable her husband really was. And instead of sealing their bond, their marriage, she was somewhere on a mountain swinging a sword. Sophie smiled a wicked smile. She had to make a play. She didn't know what that looked like yet. Was it for power? Partnership? Loyalty? Subjugation? Just the satisfaction of drawing him into her orbit? Did it matter which it was? Probably not. She was the princess of the empire. She was going to win. She always did. She wasn't going to rush. She had time. Let them train him in swordplay. Let them beat forms and loyalty into his bones. Let them believe they owned his future. Then, when the time was right, Sophie would offer him something else. Something she knew he wanted. The freedom to build. And the only thing she would ask in return was a place where she could watch. Her power purred in satisfaction. Her bloodline told her her thoughts were right. Sophie took another sip of tea as she retreated into herself. Her bloodline ability, they called it insight, was as much a mystery to her as to anyone else. Some called it foresight. Some called it prophecy. Some called it the third eye or the voice of the gods. But it was all of those things and none of those things. Mostly it was wisdom. Patterns surfaced when she watched long enough. Connections emerged between data points no one else noticed. Not answers, rarely that clean. But always with direction towards something that brought momentum of thought and history. And now, as she watched Ethan disappear into the avenue mist, something clicked. Her breath caught. The insight wasn't a vision. It was a whisper of causality folding in on itself. The sensation of standing next to a locked door and knowing the key existed somewhere. Just not where anyone was looking. But this piece of wisdom came at her like a God's damned meteor. Clear. A piece of some puzzle she didn't know she was examining. Divine Moonsteel. Ethan was going to need Divine Moonsteel. She didn't know what it would do exactly. Not at this level of insight. But she felt it. Fully. Like a pressure just beneath her thoughts. It would solve. Something troubling. A piece in the enigma that Ethan faced. It represented dissonance, both potential and folly. Salvation and yet revolution. Not evolution of one's person, but one potential. And that didn't make any sense. Yep. Wisdom that made about as much sense as drunken Mirai from the Eastern Islands. And those people sliced their bellies when they were dishonored. Crazy talk. But the impression couldn't be ignored. The insight, when it wanted her attention, would not be denied. Ethan Joe needed Divine Moonsteel. He would need it soon, and someone would have to get it to him. Sophie started to pace in the room as she ran her hands through her hair, a nervous habit that her mother absolutely hated. Her disguise had served well. The illusion let her watch the Empire's brightest minds try to outtalk one another, let her see Ethan Joe, and let the magic in her blood do its work. Sophie didn't pretend to understand the full depth of what Ethan Joe was going to build. She didn't know how he took his ideas and turned them into reality. But her insight didn't care about understanding. It cared about patterns, about pressure, about what was missing. And right now, her insight was screaming. Ethan Joe was close. Too close. He was pushing towards something raw and vital, a breakthrough that hadn't existed in the Empire before. Even without understanding the math, Sophie could feel it. If he continued like this, something would break. And when it happened, it wouldn't just be his theory that snapped. It would be him, his mana, his mind. Maybe even more. Unless someone gave him what he needed. She didn't know how her insight knew. But it did. And it was never wrong. Her mind went into overdrive. Divine Moonsteel. The thought dropped into her chest like a weight. Cold and final. So rare. So valuable. Sort of. She didn't know why he needed it. Not exactly. But her insight whispered that this was the missing element. The bridge between control and chaos. Between building something important and stopping something destructive. She didn't even know what destruction her insight was referring to. But the feeling was so distinct and prominent, it was almost scary. Otherwise, it didn't make any sense. To most practitioners, Divine Moonsteel was priceless precisely because of its temper. When a spellcaster channeled power through it, the alloy locked onto the spell's core resonance like a tuning fork and bled away stray frequencies stripped anger, panic, or doubt from the caster's intent. The result was a cleaner, sharper working that kept its original design, yet refused to warp under pressure. A gift, said the priests, granted by the moon goddess herself. It helped that the stuff was absolutely stuffed with divine power. But there were materials that could do things similar. Why did it have to be Divine Moonsteel? Really, it didn't matter why. To Sophie, it was just a solution to a problem. An insight told her if he didn't have it, soon he wouldn't make it. She exhaled and stood, tea forgotten on the ledge beside her. Sophie had done many things for many reasons. Political leverage, seduction, even power when the occasion called for it. Her actions had a deeper meaning now, a greater direction, one that had just taken a sharp right turn. Vivian Lee might have married the man, but she hadn't seen what Sophie saw. That Ethan Joe was already walking out from under their name, already reshaping the world in his own quiet way, and was already something important and prominent. Sophie wouldn't try to stop him. She would help him finish whatever her insight was telling her was so important. She stepped into her bath chamber, already forming the plan. She would find the steel. She would bring it to him. And when the time came when he finally looked up from the impossibility he was trying to build, he would see her, not as a rival, not as a princess, but as the first person who believed he could finish it, and refused to let him fall short. Chapter 48. Vivian. Lotus Peak was cold. It was harsher than she remembered, but not a completely biting cold, but something fresh and clean. The kind of cold that sank in slowly and refused to leave, like silence you'd forgotten how to fill. Vivian Lee stood at the edge of the upper terrace of her cabin, looking out across the valley where a foggy mist rolled over white stone ridges and paper-thin waterfalls streamed from impossibly high cliffs. The monastery sprawled across the valley, tucked into the mountain like it had always been part of the stone. But despite its size, the walkways were narrow, its chambers modest. This was done purposefully as here. There were no banners of affiliation or crests of the nobility. There was only time and discipline. Her quarters were small, barely wide enough for a cot, a sword rack, and a meditation alcove. She liked that. Too many homes were built to be admired. This one was built to be endured. Perfect. She trained the moment she arrived. Some wanted to greet her. She ignored it. Others moved for ceremony. She didn't have time for any of that nonsense. She settled for a whispered approval from the attending monk. She was handed a linen tunic, a pair of gripped boots, and a practice blade etched with breath suppression seals. She took it all without speaking. Now, an hour past sunrise, she moved across the frost-kissed stones of her complex's inner court. Her breath slow and shallow, the blade in her hands silent as it sliced arcs through the chilled air. Movement too, piercing edge, a signature Lee form, the jewel of her house, her inheritance, precision layered with power, control centered in chaos. Every movement built upon the last, every strike drawn from the spine. Her body moved without thought now. Only muscle memory and breath, though she did have to hold back. Her class of swordsmanship didn't chase flow. It cleared flow through momentum and connection. It should have felt perfect. It didn't. You swing like someone with somewhere else to be. The voice cut in from behind her, breezy and amused. Vivian's blade stopped mid-arc. She turned. The girl standing at the edge of the court wore no boots, no uniform. Her hair was a riot of fire-colored waves, barely tamed by a golden comb. Her smile was a challenge. In each hand, she held a folded ember steel fan, edges catching the morning light like flame-tipped daggers. Vivian recognized her. Strong, fast, unapologetically wild, and absolutely gorgeous. One of the four. Where Vivian was ice, she was fire. The girl gave a dramatic bow. Liu Anmei, laughing flame of Emberflower Pavilion, sworn blade of the 13th Crescent dual ring, and she leaned in with a wink. Your new neighbor. Vivian didn't bow. Lee Vivian, she said. Heir of, I know who you are. Anmei twirled one fan lazily. Everyone knows the Ice Queen of the Lee family. Vivian's jaw flexed. Don't call me that. Too late, Anmei sang. It's kind of perfect. They stared at each other for a beat, two swords drawn in spirit, if not in steel. Then, without warning, Anmei launched herself into the center of the court with a spin and a laugh, fanning both arms wide before dropping into a sweeping combat stance. Let's spar. Vivian raised an eyebrow. We just met. Exactly. Anmei grinned. No stakes, no grudges, just your pretty footwork against my devastating charm. I don't spar for sport. Then call it training. Anmei's eyes gleamed. Or better call it honesty. Vivian didn't move. Then she slid into stance, blade steady, spine aligned. Anmei's smile widened. Oh, now we're talking. Their first exchange was clean. Anmei launched forward with a flicker of footwork so fast it left vapor in the cold morning air. Her fan snapped open mid-stride, catching the light like wings. She moved like fire twisting, spinning, laughing under her breath. Vivian didn't move until the last moment. Then she stepped aside with surgical precision, letting Anmei pass in a blur and pivoted into a clean arc of her own. Blade high, breath held, spine steady. Anmei's smile widened as she flipped midair, landed light, and spun again. "You're so pretty when you're trying not to react," she teased. Vivian didn't answer. She didn't need to answer. She moved. Piercing Edge wasn't built for flourishes. It wasn't showy. It commanded space. One line of breath-linked strikes, pressure layered into every footstep. Her blade snapped forward with bone-cutting precision. Anmei sidestepped the first, swayed around the second, then blocked the third not with her fans, but with her knee. Vivian's eyes narrowed. That wasn't just unorthodox. That was reckless. "Are you improvising?" "Always." Anmei laughed, stepping inside Vivian's guard and spinning away with just enough space to avoid a retaliatory cut. "Come on, Ice Queen. You're strong, but you're boring." Vivian pivoted hard and brought her blade around in a low sweep. Anmei leapt, twirled midair, and landed crouched with both fans spread wide like wings. "See?" she grinned. "Predictable." Vivian moved before the grin finished forming. No breath. No hesitation. A step-in feint followed by a palm check and a mana pulse blade strike designed to knock Anmei off balance. A kill sequence modified from movement 6. Anmei slid under it, rolled, then popped back up behind her. "Better," she said, "but still stiff." Vivian turned slowly, blade low. Her breath was steady, but her shoulders were tight. She hadn't been outpaced, but she'd been outread, and Anmei wasn't even trying to win. She was playing. They circled each other for a moment, breath fogging in the cold. Then Anmei flipped her fans closed and tucked them into her belt. "That's enough," she said. "You're cute when you're frustrated, but I'm hungry." Vivian sheathed her blade without a word. Anmei walked over, hooked her arm around Vivian's before she could protest, and started dragging her toward the mess hall. "You're going to eat with me," she declared. "And you're going to tell me how a glacier like you ended up married to a man who literally makes spells talk." Vivian stiffened and narrowed her eyes. "Ethan? She wants to talk about Ethan? I'm not discussing my marriage." Anmei rolled her eyes. "Ugh, fine. But you can't stop me from having opinions. Your husband? Delicious. In a brainy, probably knows where his towels are kind of way. The way he kneeled in front of your father to save your lover's life. It really got me going." Vivian muttered, "Easy for you to say. He doesn't chase." "Good," Anmei said. "Means he might actually be worth catching." Vivian didn't reply. But her pulse hadn't quite slowed since the spar. And for the first time in weeks, she wasn't thinking about getting better. She was just thinking.